Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. I'm Reed Cowan. So that right there is the box that holds all of those electoral ballots from the 2024 election. And happening right now, lawmakers on Capitol Hill gathering as we speak to certify President-elect Donald Trump's win. Vice President Kamala Harris will be there to read aloud those electoral votes as each state's results are counted. It's a masterclass in how these things work in the peaceful transition of power. Now, let's talk about the contrast that wasn't so peaceful 4 years ago. Today's event's drastically different compared to the scene that unfolded at the Capitol building. Thousands of Trump supporters descended on the steps of our nation's Capitol to stop the 2020 election certification of then President-elect Joe Biden. Well, it came just moments after the former president told the crowd of supporters, quote, to fight like hell. The words of now President-elect Donald Trump. Well, that attack left 5 people dead and at least 150 law enforcement officers injured. Still, lawmakers today confident that the process will run smoothly. House Speaker Mike Johnson had this to say moments before entering chambers.
The two houses will get together and we'll get it done, so stay tuned. This is a great day for the country. We're going to certify the election of Donald J. Trump as the 47th president. That's our focus today, so stay tuned for the rest of it.
And we have new polling on how Americans are feeling about those who participated in that attack. And look at the difference. In 2021, 21% of people approved of the action of rioters. 21%. Now that number has jumped to 30% who approve of the action of rioters. The number of Americans that disapproved of the attack dropped from 51% to 30%. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us for more on this. Scott, pretty fascinating to see the change in numbers, and no doubt lawmakers are aware of that today.
Yeah, this was a riot that maimed police officers. They were gassed, they were beaten by hands, by bats, by hockey sticks, by chemical spray. That there's a shift in public opinion at all on this issue confuses any number of members of Congress who think unequivocally this was one of America's worst days and should always be remembered as such. But that really is the undertone to what's happening now inside the chamber as they certify this election. This is typically a ministerial task, one in which there's often far from perfect attendance. Happens in a matter of minutes, maybe close to an hour. It is a recitation that would even make a poli-sci professor yawn most years. Post-January 6th, obviously there's been a sea change in the awareness about the January 6th electoral certification. Republicans are touting their presence in the chamber after a snowstorm to be there to certify Donald Trump as the winner. This is not the sleepy affair it used to be, at least not this year.
At least not this year. Do you think that's why Vice President Kamala Harris put out that statement, went on camera, talking about the importance of doing her duty and being about the business of the people and just keeping this, as you say, ministerial?
Yeah, I think she wants to put any concerns to rest that this would be anything but an ordinary process, a ministerial process, as they call it. Also building a contrast, isn't she, between today and what happened 4 years ago, when not only was the electoral count disrupted, pushed back an entire day by the rioters, but obviously there was bloodshed, there was deaths, there were security threats. There were members of Congress trapped in that chamber, January 6, 2021, texting their loved ones they worried they were about to die or be murdered at the hands of people chanting their names, saying, "Hang Mike Pence, where's Nancy Pelosi? I want to shoot her in the brain." That's what the rioters were saying outside the windows they smashed on January 6, 2021. Let's also read why this place is a fortress, even by congressional standards today. They have a Super Bowl level security posture here with 8-foot black metal fencing surrounding the entire complex. Swarms of federal agents, Capitol Police, local police, law enforcement as far as the eye can see. Because of what happened 4 years ago, there's no intelligence that there was going to be a disruption today. There's still no sense anybody's going to object to this certification, but it is a different feel here. The aftermath, the storm cloud of that riot remains.
Well, and meanwhile, Scott, federal agencies continue investigating the people involved in that Capitol insurrection. What updates do you have, if any, on that front?
4 years to the mark, there have been 1,600 people charged for their role in the Capitol riot. That happens to be the largest criminal investigation and criminal prosecution in U.S. history. About 1,000 of them have pleaded guilty. They've acknowledged the crimes they committed. About 600 of them are accused of actually assaulting or resisting police officers physically. And about 600 people have gone to prison or are currently in prison. The promise of pardons for any number of defendants hangs over these proceedings. That could happen as early as 2 weeks from today, when outside the building, Donald Trump takes the oath of office.
But first, today's election certification. Scott MacFarlane, we know you are there to report on it. We expect to see you live on CBS Evening News as well. Thank you so much. All right, so Capitol Hill law enforcement and federal security agencies operating on high alert, as you just heard Scott say, they're going to be on high alert for the rest of the month because they really have a huge goal. They want to prevent another attack against Congress like the one that happened that Scott was talking about 4 years ago today. So for the security measures in place, we now go to CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Sganga. Okay, Nicole, aside from the fact that it looks very cold where you are, give us a sense of those security measures. I see a lot of barricades there behind you.
Yeah, Reed, very cold where we are, very snowy, very wintry, but I can tell you, having stood here 4 years ago, the security posture looks like night and day compared to January 6, 2021. You can see just behind me this 8-foot steel ring that is surrounding so many of the federal buildings here downtown, some of the museums, and of course, the U.S. Capitol behind me. And part of the reason the posture has been stood up this way by federal and local law enforcement is because today is what's called a national special security event. That is the highest federal security proclamation that could be given. And what it does is it unlocks thousands of officers from across different federal agencies, not just U.S. Capitol Police and the U.S. Secret Service, but also, Park Police, ICE, CBP, FBI, all working here to ensure that this event is safe. And we are at a really historic moment right now because we actually have 3 of these kinds of national special security events happening within 15 days. Of course, today, the certification of the electoral count happening as we're speaking now. But in addition,
to that point, Nicole,
Jimmy
I want to
Carter,
jump in
former
because
president's funeral.
To that point, we want to jump in because it just started. Stay with us for a second. We want to let our viewers hear what you're talking about.
And count the votes of the electors of the several states for President and Vice President of the United States. After ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors of the several states. The tellers on the part of the 2 houses will take their places at the clerk's desk.
All right, so that was the first bit of business there. Kamala Harris calling that count into order. And now the approach to the desk and all of the formalities that happen. The gavel just before we were able to stop our conversation with Nikole, and Nikole is still standing out in the cold for us there. Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, at least for now. She hit the gavel and started. Let's listen now as it looks like we're going to begin again.
Without objection, the tellers will dispense with reading formal portions of the certificates. After ascertaining that the certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama. Senator Fisher.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alabama seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 9 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 9 votes for vice president.
Madam President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alaska seems to be regular in form and authentic. Therefrom, that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio received 3
All right,
votes.
and so there you have it with the first 2 A's of the alphabet. They will continue going in alphabetical order, reading the certification right there, state by state, and this is how it will go for the next hour or so. Let's bring in Nicole Killion. Nicole, you have seen this, you have studied this, and it doesn't look like this is going to take a long time. It will just take about that long per state.
Well, this is a pretty routine procedure that has transpired in our nation's democracy for the better part of over 200 years. And so this is just formality in terms of certifying the results of the 2024 election. So what you're watching right now is that, as we heard the vice president there call for the tellers, and these are members of Congress representing each chamber. So this is done in a bipartisan and bicameral fashion where you have them kind of going through each state in alphabetical order, reading out that electoral count. We remember so much back in November on election night where we talked about that path to 270. And of course, each state has a certain number of electoral votes. And so those electors then are selected by the states. They certify the results on a state level, and then those certificates are then presented to Congress. So that is kind of what you are seeing them read out. That is Deb Fischer right there, who is a member of the Senate Rules Committee. Prior to that, we saw Amy Klobuchar, her counterpart, Democratic counterpart on the Senate Rules Committee. So they will continue to alternate kind of going through each state, again, reading out that electoral count. As we know, President-elect Trump won 312 electoral votes. So once they get through all 50 states and the District of Columbia, of course, the vice president will eventually read out those results once those tellers tally them and assemble their full count. So that is kind of what we are watching happen right now on the House floor in the House chamber. I would note right before the session started, it didn't look like the chamber was particularly full. We know that there are some members, of course, because there's a big snowstorm here in D.C., who may not have been able to make it back, but certainly enough to carry out this process as it should.
All right, Nicole Killion, thank you so much. Let's bring in CBS News Major Garrett now to have a conversation. Major, it's so striking to me to contrast what is happening today with what happened just 4 years ago, when this process that is a part-time immemorial of our democracy in action, the peaceful transition of power, was interrupted. Do you see this contrast as something that will also in and of itself make American history?
Of course it'll make American history. That history is being attempted to be rewritten right now. There are Republicans who want to either memory hole or whitewash what happened 4 years ago. 4 years ago was an attempt to overturn a presidential election that was legally held, verified by count after count in the disputed states, and was moving toward this formulaic certification. That certification process, the one that is playing out according to process and according to order right now, was disrupted 4 years ago. Why? Because an angry mob stormed the Capitol, broke inside, and threatened to take over the House chamber and the Senate chamber, sending lawmakers in both chambers, Senate and House representatives, fleeing for their lives and their safety. Their staffs in nearby House and Senate office buildings also felt threatened, and legitimately so. That was a violent attack to overturn a presidential election. And it was afterwards, many Republicans distanced themselves from then President Trump. There was an impeachment trial and a process which he survived. And then for the last 3.5 years, there has been a gradual, persistent, and we must underscore, successful political process by Donald Trump to make what happened 4 years ago today less than it appeared at the time. That succeeded politically does not take away the historical significance or the crimes committed on that day.
Well, and Major, a lot of people have said that was a national tragedy, what happened, and that's really speaking light on what happened 4 years ago. And under any other circumstances, you would expect on the 4-year mark after a national tragedy for lawmakers to have something to say about it. Are you hearing anything from Capitol Hill, from either side, that marks this 4-year mark since that tragedy?
Democrats are marking it in a very muted sort of way. When asked how do they feel about this, they will say, I remember this process 4 years ago. I remember the fear. I remember the injuries inflicted on Capitol and Metropolitan police officers defending the Capitol complex. Republicans aren't talking about it in any context other than Trump won, let's certify, let's get on with things, as if it never even happened. And again, that is a political response to a national tragedy. That political response prevailed in the 2024 election, gives President-elect Trump what he regards as vindication. It's not legal vindication. It is political vindication. And there was a great clash between law and politics over this 2024 election, and the unique refusal of a sitting president to accept a free and fair election in the country for the first time in our entire history. And that President-elect Trump is on the verge of returning to that office. Having done that, he says, proves that if he wasn't right in the particulars, he was right in the atmospheric outrage he felt about that election. His supporters felt it, and a sufficient number of Americans did not believe that disqualifying enough to deny him a return to the White House. That he's on his way back, for him, is the ultimate political victory.
Well, and let's talk about something that we heard over and over on the campaign trail by the president-elect, and that's the P word, pardons. What are some of the options that he has on his desk as it relates to pardons for the January 6th insurrectionists, Major?
So some 1,600 have either pled guilty or been convicted of crimes related to the riot on Capitol Hill on January 6th. Presidential powers are sweeping. They are, in the term of art, is plenary. They cannot be challenged, not by Congress, not by the courts of law. Presidential pardon is absolute. So President-elect Trump has said, when asked, that he will take these pardons on by a case-by-case basis. There are people in the Capitol complex circling it right this afternoon, advocating for everyone, even those who committed acts of violence repeatedly, either on their way up the Capitol steps or inside the Capitol, to give them full pardons. Violent criminals, essentially assaulting people, assaulting officers of the law, Capitol Police or Metropolitan Police, they should get pardons from President-elect Trump once he takes office. President-elect Trump hasn't said he's willing to go that far, but there is certainly political pressure to do that. I think it is quite clear he intends to pardon most, if not all, of those not convicted of or who pled guilty to the most serious acts of violence associated with January 6th.
What's so striking to me, Major, is also on the campaign trail, not only this election cycle, but the cycle before that, Donald Trump ran as a candidate who said over and over and over he was pro-police. And so in that environment, with those stated sentiments, it is also worth noting that police officers took the brunt of what happened on January 6th. So as we go into the consideration that a blanket pardon is one of the options, that's quite striking, is it not?
It is striking, and it's something that the American public debated. Certainly Democrats tried to pay attention to and play up for consideration in the presidential campaign. Many of the wounded officers lent their voice to that, saying, wait a minute, if this political party, the Republican Party, led by Donald Trump, is pro-police, how can it turn a blind eye to these acts of violence committed against us? And the political answer from the Trump universe was as follows. Those were police officers protecting a corrupt place and a corrupt system. They deserved, therefore, to be beaten up. That's the essence of the Republican and pro-Trump orientation to that question. Those police officers were defending something that, to their mind, was illegal or corrupt or some combination of the two. And therefore, their defense of that place, the Congress, their defense of the certification of a presidential election, they considered without foundation, without evidence, invalid, meant they deserved to get beaten up by the mob. That orientation is really important in our history, because if that orientation flows through the political actions taken by this incoming Trump administration, it will be based on the sense that there's no political cost to orient yourself to a law enforcement question like that in the future.
Well, and speaking to political costs, and I'm going to tell our directors and our producers in the back if we possibly can pull up the poll that we referenced earlier in this broadcast. I want to ask you, because it looks like there's been some erosion of sentiment regarding what happened on January 6th, 4 years ago, in how Americans feel about what happened on January 6th. Used to be more Americans then said that they did not approve of what happened on January 6th. And as of today, that polling showed that there are less people who question or have a problem with what happened there than when we first asked them 4 years ago. Is that a political win? Is that a showing of erosion that the January 6th Commission just did not make an adequate case to the American public with the facts?
It's a combination of things. One, Donald Trump learned this very early in life. Attack, attack, attack if you're on offense, and even if you lose or do something wrong, never admit defeat, never admit you were wrong. So his inflexibility on the question of pushing forward on January 6th sent a message to the country that he was going to take the political risk to defend January 6th no matter what. Over time, people became less pleased with the Biden administration. That began to filter into their consideration of January 6th. They were unhappy with President Biden, so maybe they're less willing to condemn Trump over January 6th. All those things came together. Many Americans still consider January 6th a tragedy, but not enough politically for it to make a pivotal difference, for Kamala Harris.
And we are seeing that poll there on the screen. Then 21% approving of the January 6th actions, now 30%. And strongly disapprove on one of 2021, 51%, now 30% strongly disapprove. Major Garrett, we appreciate the conversation today.